about what will affect business in Africa, and conflict is at the heart of it. We have two tiers of conflict. We have countries that are affected by terrorism and civil strife in the eastern part of Africa, and we also have a very unstable West Africa, which is dogged by coups and whatnots. Looking at some of these challenges which are ready and alive, for example, the eastern part of DRC, the northern side of Ethiopia in the Tigray region, Somalia is also struggling with the terrorism aspect. How then does Africa move towards enabling the guns to silence forever and for peace to prevail, for business to thrive?
Right. Well, thank you, Leila. I think that's a very critical question. Right. I think it's interesting. Right now, it's one of the biggest agenda of the African Union. And not only that, but I think now there will be change of chairmanship in the Union from Senegal to a very small island in the Indian Ocean, Comoros, which has very limited diplomatic and political weight. So I think the African Union has to undergo a lot of things like institutional capacity, sometimes also be proactive, you know, in terms of diplomacy. Like right now, the issue of DRC, you know, does not need waiting or side chat. It needs immediate attention because it's a very concerning issue. This could lead to an interstate it's already an interstate tension, but it also could lead to an internationalized conflict because, you know, this involves many other countries and there could be a spillover, considering that CAR is just next there with its own issues of transition. And I think one of the ways of dealing with issues of conflict is also when African leaders, as Professor said, can genuinely come together, sit down and try to see ways of how they can do it. So, for example, I know that's going to be a big challenge for the Comoros president, Azali Osmani, to really, you know, deal with all these issues. But I'm sure there are other leaders like South Africa and the rest. So there is need for that proactive process. The other thing also, I think sometimes as the other problem of African security issues is that everybody is involved. So, for example, you have the AU Commission chair who is from Chad, and then also issues of Chad affects him directly. So I think also a way of distancing from these issues and tackling it as a continent, but in the long term. And I think also and the other thing also really sticking in terms of what is the rules, you know, like not really bending, you know, like the issue of Chad, where the African Union, instead of following the LOM declaration of saying if any country has a change of state, no, unconstitutionally, then they're kicked out of the union, to kind of like send a message that this cannot be tolerated. You know, it was given a grace moment, you know, the junta that came in, led by the son of the president who was removed through the coup. So that also does not show a very good image in terms of really handling those situations, because it doesn't give a strong message like you can really deal with this situation. And I think that they were able to rectify with now the other coups of Sudan, Burkina Faso, but it's not enough. And the other thing also, I think African Union also has to learn how to work with other organizations. Like in the case of Libya, right now, UN has taken the lead, you know, having a special representative, but they also have to come in and own that process. I think the other thing also is that lack of ownership in dealing with security, peace, and humanitarian issues. And that's why also you have a lot of issues in terms of self-sustaining operations of the African Union in terms of finance. Right now, one of the biggest financiers of the African Union activity is the EU. EU is going to the Europe because now they have their own problem with the Ukraine-Russia war, so they're going to focus more on there. So the African economy will feel like an orphan because they have no one to support. So I think also there is a lot of mechanism that has to be put in, and this is all about goodwill, commitment, and of course having a long-term picture, like the long-term goal, because I think most of these issues are more of reactionary than being proactive, like starting early enough. And right now there are a lot of issues to deal with, and if they are not taken into account, not only will it hamper trade between states, but it might also bring down some countries. Like some countries will be dragged with those conflicts. Like I mean, I see as Congo as a hurricane in this region, you know, DRC, and taking East Africa down with it, because these are the same members of the East African community.
It's interesting you talk about the DRC, because at the moment the